Once again, good afternoon. I'm Allison Lafferlita. I'm the Executive Director of the Nonprofit Resource Hub. I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, Cyber Attacks in the Hybrid Workplace. This webinar will be presented by Michael Fleischer, Senior Vice President, and Josh Weisberg, Chief Risk Officer, Manager, Director, RMS, both with SterlingRisk Insurance. Before we get started, however, for those of you who are new to the NRH, I would like to welcome you and just give you a brief overview of what we do. We're a professional association providing education like today's event, support, services, and goods to the nonprofit community. We provide a variety of free educational opportunities just like today, as well as our Ask the Expert, where you have an opportunity to take a lunch and talk with somebody who is an expert in their field about some of your questions pertaining to running your nonprofit. We also provide opportunities for exclusive support with executive directors. This is really great. It's an opportunity for our EDs to get together in a safe space and talk and exchange resources. We also offer a nonprofit meet and greet. We're actually going to have one this coming Monday in Huntington. This is an opportunity for nonprofit leaders to get together. You'll be there with your colleagues who are also in leadership positions, as well as our associate members. They are those people who help provide support to the nonprofit community. So if you are not aware of that event, please go onto our website, check it out. It is Monday evening, and it's a really great time to be together. Oftentimes you'll talk about different resources that you're looking for, and when you're in that room, you're able to find them. We also have other events that I would certainly encourage you to go check out on our website as well. So without further ado, I would certainly like to welcome our presenters once again today, Michael and Josh. I know that this is a very important topic, so let's get started. Welcome, Michael and Josh.
Thank you, Allison.
Thank you very much, Allison. We are very pleased to partner with the NRH to present this webinar with regard to the cyber insurance marketplace. We're going to go over a number of different areas. I will focus on the market update, and Josh will give you some real deep dive into managing protocols and protection, as well as common cyber environmental coverage issues. Okay, so I'm going to begin with the cyber insurance market place update. Okay, I'm sure the fact that any of you are here, you're probably well aware that the cyber insurance market has basically exploded, and that you're probably paying higher premiums than you were, and you've endured some of the issues within the industry. Okay? Cybercrime has grown exponentially. So let me just take a step back. Cyber policies began being written only as recently as 1997 by AIG. They were initially for clients within the software industry, and then soon expanded to many other forms of businesses. And initially, in order to obtain insurance, you probably had to provide not much more information than your website and the number of employees. Okay? It was that simple, but unfortunately, what's changed that is cybercrime. Okay, estimates are that cybercrime could increase to 10.5 trillion by 2025. Okay, some clients are enduring increases in premium up to 50 to 200% over expiring premiums. They're also being asked to endure higher deductibles and/or retentions on their renewals, and all of this is really as a result of the cyber losses within the industry. Cyber carriers are requiring increased security controls and requiring clients to really focus on the protection that they have in place. More restrictive coverages are being offered on renewals, supplements, higher retentions, larger deductibles. Clients that have endured certain types of losses, such as ransomware and/or social engineering claims, are finding that they might even have those particular exposures being excluded. The exposure to geopolitical risks and war exclusions as a result of conflicts like the Russia-Ukraine conflict are finding their ways into the insurance renewals. One of the most difficult things in our industry is having to explain to a client that has had no losses, that has or profitable loss history, that their premiums are going up dramatically and or their terms and conditions are being affected. This is no different than any other form of insurance. If a particular insurance carrier, carriers, or reinsurers endure large losses, they're going to have to make up that shortfall. And where is that going to happen? It's going to be the renewals for this particular coverage going forward. You'll find that some carriers have left the marketplace, and those that have remained are really looking to tighten controls and are really becoming a lot more difficult as far as the underwriting of these policies. Insurers are looking for applicants to have multi-factor authentication. That is probably one of the most crucial items. You're not going to be able to just click on your phone, open up your email, and life is that simple. It's going to have to be verified via a text or something so that the cyber criminals don't have the ability to access your emails. Let's take a look at some of the different types of claims and what we're finding in the industry. Fund transfer fraud is the most common and fastest growing threat, with nearly 1/3 of all claims in 2022. Experts anticipate a continued surge in 2023 as cyber criminals continue to seek and utilize artificial intelligence, ChatGPT, and look to monetize their actions immediately. Analysts continue to assume that these losses are going to rise. For the past 3 years, ransomware and fund transfer fraud claims show no signs of letting up, and the average is about $303,000 per claim stolen via ransomware. Think about that number. The average ransomware is $300,000 per claim, and approximately $200,000 for electronic fund transfer claims in the past year. The amount stolen by compromised email security increased more than 50% last year and went up to almost $100,000. Okay, so contemplate these numbers when you're looking at the premiums that you're paying for your coverage, and recognize that there's significant losses that are occurring. It's a tremendous, a tremendous exposure out there. One of the things that we see, in as much as the carriers look at the technology that you have in place, multi-factor authentication, the most important and the biggest exposure in this particular area is the human element. Okay, the majority of claims are caused as a result of someone maybe not being as careful or as focused and being distracted by the 5 screens that we have in front of us, the fact that people are working remotely and they might not be as focused as you would be sitting in your office, and something comes across your desk, phone, etc. And as you're trying to do something, amongst 5 different things, you're going to be careless, and and these type of losses, occur. And it's important for clients to recognize this, and for their employees to really focus on that. The next portion of the presentation is managing cyber protocols and protection. I'm going to hand that over to my esteemed colleague, Mr. Weisberg, and ask him to continue for us.
Thank you, Michael. Very much appreciated. So my name is support. My name is Josh Weisberg. I am the Chief Risk Officer here at SterlingRisk, and I oversee our entire portfolio of risk management services. And within that portfolio is our claims advocacy and claims administration services. And when we talk about claims advocacy, what we're really talking about is what I like to call both defense and offense. The defense being, what am I going to do to prepare in the event that I ultimately do have a claim? And what do I do once I actually have a claim? How am I going to execute on that plan? And in the cyberspace, that's more mission critical than in virtually any other line of insurance. If you have a trip and fall claim and somebody files a lawsuit against your organization, that's going to take years to ultimately evolve and ultimately to resolve. In the world of cyber insurance, seconds absolutely count, minutes are critical, hours are essential. Having a plan in place that you can execute on immediately is 100% necessary. And so when we start talking about what are we going to do to prepare, what are we going to do to make sure that that ounce of prevention is absolutely worth the pound of cure, we start with a document that's called the breach plan. And some of your organizations may have it, some of you may not. There's always detail, if you do have one, that you're going to want to amplify. It might sound fancy, but all it really is a blueprint, a roadmap for how you're going to handle a situation where your computer networks have either been breached or there is a suspected breach. And once you have that plan in place, it gives you the opportunity to execute and to marshal all the assets that are going to be essential in the event that you have to deal with some form of network security event. And you're going to have critical contact information in there and critical insurance policy information. The critical contact information, if you have a business continuity plan, you'll be familiar with this. It means that you're going to have your C-suite folks, your CFO, your chief administrative officer, operations, and obviously your IT infrastructure folks, all the internal team that's going to be necessary to respond to a breach event, their contact information, and most especially their emergent contact information, cell phones, alternative numbers, all of that is going to be built into the breach plan. And then there's the critical team, and we'll be talking a little bit more in detail about this in a minute, the critical external team that you're going to have to deal with. Your insurance advisors, your brokers, your insurance carrier, policy information, how you notice a claim, all of that is going to be built into the breach document itself, in addition to these critical vendors. And the critical vendors that we're going to go through actually match up beautifully with the buckets of coverage that you should have built into your cyber insurance policy. And as you're reviewing these programs, as you're reviewing your insurance policy for coverage, we can check these off and make sure that you actually have coverage for these expenses built into your insurance contract. And so we talk about, you have your internal IT, but you're also going to have your external IT forensics. And all that really means is the second that you know that you had a suspected breach, you're going to have emergent contact information for the vendor that's going to come in, look at your computer systems, A, confirm that you actually had a breach, and B, where did it come from? Identifying cause and origin as quickly as possible is absolutely essential. The sooner that they start looking, the sooner that they can plug the gaps, fill the holes, fix your systems, and get you restored. And Michael kind of alluded to this before. There's the human element to all of this. The faster that you get your systems back up, the more productive your teams are going to be, and they're not going to be pulled from all of their day-to-day experiences, their day-to-day jobs, in order to deal with a cyber event. And it can be tremendously time-consuming. So getting those forensic IT folks into your systems immediately is extremely important. And there are other vendors, critical vendors, that are built into all this. Of course, Cyber Insurance Council. And all Cyber Council has to do is, their job is to advise you on what your legal obligations are going to be in the event that you actually do have a breach. And that really amounts to a bunch of different issues. It amounts to critically what we call notification. Under the laws in virtually every US jurisdiction now, both statute, regulatory, there is authority that requires you to notify your customers, to notify your employees if their personally identifiable information, their social security numbers, driver's license numbers, even in some instances, home addresses, if that information is stored on your systems and a bad actor, a threat actor, has compromised your systems and gained access to that information, you need to let these outside parties, your customers, your donors, know about that breach. And in many instances, you have to offer them protective services. You have to offer them credit and identity monitoring protection. All of that gets built into what Cyber Insurance Council is going to advise you. Again, you have to get involved as soon as possible because there is a clock on when you have to get those notices out. And if you don't hit that clock, you could have a major problem on your hands. Now, The good news is, as all this gets built into your breach plan, these are, again, all expenses that should be covered under your insurance policy with a couple of important rules. Number one, the vendors that you use should absolutely be pre-approved by your insurance company. Every insurance company has lawyers, has forensic IT vendors, credit monitoring firms that they work with routinely and that they're okay with you using. If you try to use an attorney, a law firm, a vendor that's not on the pre-approved list, number one, you may not have coverage for it, but number two, it's going to slow the entire process down because trying to get approval after the fact is not a good idea. Get those firms approved beforehand, build that contact information into your breach plan, and you're going to be much, much happier with your overall experience. The other thing that you're definitely going to want to make sure that you have as a checkbox in that plan is getting budgets upfront from every single vendor. And this is so important for two very important reasons. Number one, retentions and deductibles are built into every cyber insurance policy, and they can be extremely high. $50, $75, $100, $200,000, which basically means the first $200,000 in expense belongs to you. Getting that budget up front allows you to forecast, am I going to exhaust my retention? Is my deductible going to be fully satisfied? Those budgets will tell you that, but even more importantly, your cyber insurance policy is a finite asset. Let's say you have $2 million in coverage. Knowing how much each one of these vendors is going to cost is also going to tell you, do I have a concern about whether or not every dollar that I spend on a vendor is going to leave me without enough insurance protection? And so building all of that out is all part of this budgetary process, but they will not give it to you unless you ask for it or your insurance company asks for it. So make sure that's built into your workflow when you're dealing with a potential cyber event. And the last two pieces of this, when we talk about business interruption loss, your cyber policy should absolutely cover you for lost income and certain expenses that you're going to incur because you can't access your computer system. So for example, if you have salary built into a particular worker and they can't work because your computer systems are locked, that's what's called extra expense. You might be entitled to get reimbursed for that expense under your insurance policy. If your internal IT folks need to work overtime and they're charging you overtime to try to resolve a breach and try to fix a network security event, you might be also entitled to coverage for those dollars, for those expenses. But the only way that you can actually access the policy for those dollars is if you provide the insurance company with proof that you've sustained those losses. And the great thing is that if your policy is set up the right way, and you should definitely be asking this question, your insurance policy will include what's called claims preparation coverage. What does that mean? That means that you can hire an outside insurance forensic accountant that will help you go step by step through the process of documenting your loss and calculating your loss. You should not try to do this on your own. It's very important to get an expert involved that, again, your insurance company will pay for, but you must, just like we said, cyber counsel, just like we said, for your forensic IT vendors, get them involved early. Make sure they're in that breach plan, because if you try to reverse engineer these documents, you try to reverse engineer the proof later on, it's going to be extremely difficult to do. And the last thing I just wanted to mention, Michael talked about ransomware before. I can tell you, having dealt with a number of ransomware claims on behalf of our clients, this claim in particular can be the most difficult to ultimately resolve and take the longest to potentially resolve. If you have a ransomware claim on your hands, you need to start asking all of your vendors up front, what do I need to do in order to bring this claim to conclusion? And a little pro tip, your insurance policy will also provide you with coverage for specific firms that specialize in negotiation with ransomware actors. Think of it almost like a law enforcement, an FBI official that negotiates with somebody who's kidnapped somebody in order to secure that ransom. You need to make sure you're paying careful attention to the entire ransomware negotiation process. Sometimes it pays to overpay on the ransom so that you can get access to your systems more quickly than you otherwise would. Because if you wait to pay that ransom, let's say for 2 or 3 months, all this time you're losing access to your data. Sometimes it's better to overpay. It's a very intricate, specific issue, but a pro tip and one that you should really pay attention to in the event that you do have a claim. Now, we've done a good job of kind of walking through what the breach plan is going to contain, these coverage buckets that you're going to access, how you're going to access them, but there's more prep that we should do so that when you do have that loss, you can execute against it. And listen, there is no question, as Michael laid out beautifully before, cyber threats are 100% on the rise. They've been on the rise for years. If you haven't sustained a cyber breach at some point, there is a significant chance, significant odds that you will. So it's really important to understand these steps. Forget about the contact information of the vendors for a minute. Look at your policy. It's super important to take a look at what the policy actually says. You got to make sure that your notice obligations that are built into the policy you're complying with. And in the world of cyber insurance, the notice requirements are extremely strict. I've got up on here on the board, claims made and reported coverage. We don't have to get into the minutia of it. All I will tell you is when it comes to cyber insurance, put the notice in immediately. Check off within your plan, have I provided notice immediately? Make sure your broker is 100% in the loop because they're going to be the one that helps you orchestrate the entire cyber claims process. Get that claim number, get the adjuster contact information, and set up that staging call as soon as possible. Now, there are other deadlines that are built into your cyber policy that can be relevant in the event of a claim, one of which is proof of loss. All that really means is you've got to submit certain documentation that quantifies your loss to the insurance company. There are deadlines that are built in for that requirement as well, 90 days, 180 days. It really all depends, but either way, again, something that you don't want to miss a step on, make sure that it's in your checklist. Now, Michael mentioned before that cyber insurers are exercising more and more scrutiny over what security controls do you have in place? Do you have CrowdStrike? Do you have multi-factor authentication? What level of multi-factor authentication do you have? You're going to have to represent to the insurance company before they bind up the coverage that these specified systems are actually in place. If it turns out in the event of a claim that for whatever reason, those systems that you've represented to the insurance company are not in place, you might very well have a coverage issue on your hands. This means two things. Number one, if unfortunately that ever is something that you have to deal with, you got to let your broker know right away. And certainly don't put anything related to that in writing. Give them a call, explain to them what's going on so that they can help you try to navigate and narrate the loss information and the loss history to the insurance company to keep that claim a covered claim. And the other important piece of information to keep in mind is you should be constantly reviewing what systems you have in place, not just when you're buying the insurance, but also during the policy period. If you do that during the policy period, number one, it gives you the opportunity to upgrade those services. And number two, it's an audit control. If something isn't in place that's supposed to be in place, you can rectify that. You can address it so that if you have a claim at some point down the road, now it's a covered claim. And the last thing I'll mention, we're talking a lot, the title of today's presentation is cybersecurity in the remote world, right? And especially in the non-for-profit space, we have a lot of workers that potentially work in a remote environment. That means that the rules have changed. Post-COVID, you need to make sure that your cyber insurance policy covers your employees' personal laptops, their work laptops, their mobile devices, their smartphones, their tablets. Some cyber policies will only cover you for computer systems that are actually located inside your business premises. So for example, here at SterlingRisk right now, I'm staring at a computer that's right outside my window. That's without question a covered computer. But what happens if I have a laptop and I'm working at my dining room table off of my own personal Wi-Fi and my laptop gets hacked? Do I have coverage for infiltration into that laptop? You got to be very careful. You got to make sure that that coverage is definitely in place. And in the remote environment, it's even more important. And the last thing I'll mention, and this is somewhat of a technical issue, Michael mentioned before the Russia-Ukraine conflict, and it's not just specific to that particular conflict, but as the geopolitical situation throughout the world continues to evolve, war exclusions are essentially designed to bar coverage for a shooting war. But let's say if there were a war to break out between America and Canada, and you have a shooting war, damage or loss associated with the American-Canadian war would not be covered under a war exclusion. That's its traditional understanding. But like everything else, and especially in the world of cyber insurance, this has really started to evolve. And the specific concerns related to the Russian-Ukrainian conflict are what happens if it's not a shooting war? What if it's not a missile, but what if it's a ransomware claim? And what if that ransomware claim was perpetrated by a non-state actor associated with the Russian government or associated with the Ukrainian government? Does that fall within the purview of an exclusion that bars coverage for claims related to war. This is a really emerging issue. The advice that I would give you is this: make sure you're looking at your policies and talking to your broker. You can get forms that will give you exceptions to the war exclusion for cyber terrorism. You need to make sure that those are built into your policy, and that way you have the best possible chance of getting coverage for a hack or a ransomware claim associated in some fashion with, again, just for example, the Russian-Ukrainian conflict. So we're going to bring it all together, and we can flip to the next slide. What do you need to do? You need to know the threats. You need to know about Russia, Ukraine. You need to make sure that you've got the right resources in place. You're talking to those vendors. You're making sure that they're on panel, that you've got the right people in place in the event you have a breach. You're going to have all that incorporated into your breach plan, so it's documented and you can check it off and you're not going to miss a step. And you're checking your policies constantly during the policy term, updating them, modifying them as these threats continue to evolve.
Okay.
Okay, well, thank you both. That you packed a big punch in a very short period of time, but we do have a lot of good questions. So
Great,
I'm gonna read them
So I
off
guess
to you.
we're sleeping.
So one of the first questions that we got was, hang on. One is that I'm reading a lot about the part that AI plays in protecting a company from cyber attacks. Do you have any opinion on that? And should that be written into a policy?
I think that throughout the underwriting process, I think it's important, as Josh outlined, it's very important to outline to the underwriters exactly what you have in place, what you're utilizing in terms of protection, as well as what technologies that you're utilizing. And absolutely, I would advise the underwriters of the utilization of this. There's good and there's bad, of everything. And I think that it's something that it is the wave of the future. There's no question. We're all starting to utilize it. It streamlines, it makes things a lot quicker. And it's definitely something that I would make the underwriters aware of, and it enables them to, incorporate that into the underwriting of the program.
Great answer. I would just add a couple things to that. First is, and especially for the attendees in this audience, AI is important in the cyber world, and we'll come back to that in 1 second. But keep in mind, and everybody's starting to deploy AI in as part of their business model. We're doing it here at Sterling. You need to make sure that, for example, you have errors and omissions insurance, totally separate form of coverage. But if you're using AI to help you in furnishing those professional services, you must let your underwriters know, so that your description of professional service, so that the carrier knows this is something that you're doing. So it's not just specific to cyber. People think that it's only a cyber-related exposure. It actually has a professional liability exposure to it too. But in the AI world, what you should be really, really careful about, just from like kind of a risk control perspective, if you're using it and if you're giving AI any form of confidential information or personal information, that can be a major, major problem. A lot of open AI, which is basically an open network, if you upload business information, that's now part of the database and it becomes incorporated into the actual artificial intelligence platform. I would strongly advise not to do that. Don't do that. Don't put any confidential business information into an AI platform. Sanitize whatever you're giving it so that you don't run into a problem there.
So there was a second part to that question, and I'm pretty certain that you did answer it. But the second part was also, does using AI void insurance because you're sharing data in an unsafe way?
Yes, the short answer is, as we said before, you make certain security representations to the carrier when you bind up the coverage. More and more, we're starting to see that they're asking questions related to AI deployment. But if there is any inaccuracy in that information, it could be a problem. You need to be very, very careful about it.
Excellent. Are you ready for some more questions?
Do it.
Sure.
Okay, good, because I have them for you. How often should nonprofits be looking at their policy?
Well, we like to look at coverages with our clients throughout the year. I have a question that I always ask someone, and I say, when should you be preparing for next year's renewal? And, you get varied answers 3 months before and 5 months, 6 months, and realistically, the answer is the day after you renew. Okay, because the day after you renew, you know what coverages you have in place, you know what protocols you have in place, you know what protection you have in place, and now we know what we need to do in order to prepare for next year, because we have the ability to look at it and say, okay, we know exactly where we're at today. We know how we need to improve. We know what we want to do to enhance the protocols and protection that we have in place. So I would be looking, at and having discussions with your partner, with your broker, periodically throughout the year. We have conversations with our clients all throughout the year. I don't, we don't look at it from a perspective of, well, I'll see you in 11 months and we'll prepare for the renewal. We contact our clients on a regular basis, gauging what's going on, what changes are occurring, and preparing for the next year. And also within that time frame, we're advising our clients of what to expect in the marketplace. It's very important for us to let the clients know, hey, market's really tough. Be prepared, from an accounting perspective and or from just an underwriting perspective, know what to expect.
And the only thing I would add to that is, pricing is obviously mission critical, right? We're all concerned about that, especially in the not-for-profit space. I will say though that conversations, when we're talking about looking at our policies, it's conversations with your broker, and it's also conversations with your underwriter and with your insurance company for a couple of different reasons. Number one, again, the threat landscape is constantly evolving. So from a risk control perspective, are there updates that we should be making to our systems? Are there better protections that we could be putting in place? Your cyber insurers are on the front line in terms of seeing what those threats are. So you can start getting real-time information as to what those issues might actually be. And you can take steps to address those now, not necessarily when the policy is approaching renewal, but deal with that now, which will hopefully result in cost savings or cost containment on your insurance program. So it's not just about looking at the policies for pricing purposes, it's looking at the policies for purposes of what services can I pull out of my insurance company to make me a better risk.
Okay, that's a lot to digest. Just so everybody knows, we are recording this and this will be available to you afterwards if you need to go back and listen to this and again, let it all digest, because we know this can be somewhat overwhelming if this is not what you're doing on a daily basis. We also have another question here. What are some of the things you can do to reduce the price in cyber insurance?
We basically go back to what we've gone through. Okay, it's a matter of having the best protocols in place, having the best protection in place, having your employees as educated as possible, everybody looking from a perspective of being as looking to manage the risk as much as possible. Okay, looking at 2 clients, we have one where the employees are focused and there are tremendous protocols in place and the management of the organization buy into this, as opposed to the client or the potential client that says, that's what I have insurance for. I'm not too concerned about it. Who cares? I don't want multi-factor authentication. Tough. I want to make it very simple. You tell me which is going to be easier to insure and which is going to pay a higher price and which is going to have a higher retention. I would say that would be the option B.
Right. And then the easiest way to deal with this also is, at the end of the day, it's cyber, it's computer related, it's technologically related, but it's also human related, which basically means that there are training programs that you can put in place to help you know, wait a minute, this is a suspicious link. This isn't something that I should click on. Having those trainings in place, and the beautiful thing is, again, your insurance company will give you those trainings most often for free. So everybody in the organization should constantly be training on constant vigilance, making sure that every email I look at, I'm not doing something that's going to expose the organization to a threat.
I know internally, we work with our cyber insurance carrier. And I know our IT department is constantly testing us, okay? We are constantly receiving emails that are basically plants from them to test us, okay? And, we have a phishing alert button so that in case there's an issue, we're going to just highlight it and identify it and allow our internal professionals and or our external professionals the opportunity to review this. Your employees have to be on the ball at all times. The minute you let your guard down is the minute that something like this occurs.
It's basically at this point, I don't click into any link, I don't look at any email, because I'm afraid that every single one of them is a fish alert, but that's neither here nor there.
But yeah, and that's, sometimes you find you're a little too conservative, but rather err on the side of conservatism as opposed to being, laissez-faire.
Mhm. Well, so I know that you just mentioned the training seminars, and not everybody has access to that, we'll say, or let's say they're looking for other resources that are available to them. How can they stay up to date on the potential risks and threats, maybe in between a seminar or a training, or is there a resource available to everybody that they should be checking in with from time to time?
So there's a couple different things that you can subscribe to, and I'm happy to give the list of different publications that you could just distribute to everybody that's on the webinar, that can help you keep abreast of a lot of this stuff. There are some wonderful organizations that are run by former FBI cybersecurity investigators that give constant what we call threat intelligence analysis. And some of them can be dense, but others are actually really, really good at just telling you, hey, this is what we're seeing out there, and this is stuff that you should be careful about. Business Insurance is another publication that has a beautiful cyber insurance threat landscape update portfolio that they send out. Like I said, we can give you all of those publications. Most of them are free. You can just subscribe to them, and that'll help you kind of keep, abreast of what's going on. Certainly, depending on which broker that you're working with, Sterling has its own publications that we send out. You can certainly send those out as well. And your insurance company. Your insurance company has, trainings and publications that they give on this stuff all the time.
And that's,
who do you typically work with in a nonprofit when you're going over policies? Is it the board? Is it the executive director? Is it a combination of the two? Is there somebody dedicated that you're seeing?
All of the above. For the most part, I'd say that we're dealing with the CFOs, the financial people, sometimes the board members, but really usually the financial, brain trust within the nonprofits.
I will say that whenever we're dealing with cyber insurance, I try to insist that, yes, by all means, if, like, for example, the CFO is running point, if the CAO and IT are not involved in those conversations, not a good thing. You really want to make sure that you're casting a wide net in terms of, yes, I'm negotiating premium, but I'm also negotiating coverage. So you need to have all of those stakeholders involved.
Yeah, IT needs to be involved in the whole process. And if it's an outside contractor, they need to be engaged within within the negotiations and the renewals and even throughout the year. Because many of the nonprofits don't have some of these people in place internally, so we have to depend upon and really utilize the outside sources that they're engaging.
So that leads to another question then. Somebody just wrote in that I know that you typically work with larger nonprofits, but on Long Island we do have a lot of smaller grassroots organizations that are really strapped financially, and insurance costs can be very prohibitive for them. What they are asking is, if they're under an umbrella policy, is there something that is available to them at a lower cost? And the example that I'm given is if they're a member of like Health and Welfare Council of Long Island, or a member of United Way. Do they have access to policies through them?
I think it depends, really. But
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I just said one of the things you have to be careful about is if you're underwriting within an umbrella organization, your risk is obviously every single member of the organization is going to have distinctive risks, right? Meaning, this particular non-for-profit might have these controls in place and another non-for-profit might have totally different ones. And so it's case by case.
Yeah, and I would say that they would have to really look to the umbrella organization and ask for an interpretation. Is their coverage available for them through the policy that they have in place? And I would, state that the most important thing is really communication. Okay. Don't make an assumption, oh, well, we're part of United Way, we're part of whatever it is, whatever the organization is, get a real clarification from them as to what you're receiving from them and what you can receive.
Yeah, Allison, just one other thing to keep in mind there. If you're part of an umbrella, some form of cyber umbrella program, you're probably sharing limit. What that basically means is, let's say you have 20 organizations that are all part of that umbrella, and they have 5 million in coverage. Now you've only got 5 million in coverage for 20 different organizations within that umbrella. So it's something that when you're pricing it out and you're saying, okay, this is cheaper, just keep in mind, I'm getting what we call diluted limit for that exposure.
It different than a premises liability situation where these large organizations could have 50 and 100 or 200 million dollars of coverage. Cyber insurance isn't something that you find large organizations buy tremendous numbers, in terms of, there aren't many organizations carrying 50 and 100 million dollars of cyber insurance. So as Josh outlined, the shared limit aspect and the fact that other members within that umbrella organization might have had breaches and claims would really bring back, how much is really available in terms of loss. Okay.
So there was an additional question to that, but I think you just answered it. And I just want to really be clear about the answer. Nonprofits are not privy to their own individual policies once they're under that umbrella. You are with that group. You don't get an individual policy. Is that correct?
Right. You can get an individual limit, but that's the extreme exception, not the rule. Sometimes you can get dedicated limit. But typically, you don't see that in the non-for-profit space. You'll see that certainly in the for-profit space. It all depends.
Okay. Okay, and I think you actually did address the next question, but I'm going to put it out there in case there's something you want to add to it. But I'm pretty sure you did cover it in your presentation, which is what should nonprofits be sure is covered in these plans? So I think really, just based on what I'm reading, what would you say if they only had the top 3 options for them to be sure to have covered? What would you say those top 3 should be?
I mean, if we're talking about different buckets of coverage, right? Meaning you've got a cyber program. I guess that's the question, right? Like I've got a menu in front of me. What do I need? What do I need to make sure that I have in my cyber policy, Allison? Is that basically
I think
the
yes.
question?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So I mean, you're definitely talking about the forensic costs, right? Figuring out what went wrong and how to fix it. You definitely need that. The legal costs, absolutely essential. Knowing what got compromised and how you need to respond, that's mission critical. I will say ransomware is probably in there as a top 3 too. It's just the threats associated with ransomware are exponentially on the rise. I will say this though, and you can speak to this also. Typically, you're not going to necessarily see a savings in cost. Like for example, if we have 5 core buckets of coverage, most carriers are offering those 5 buckets in tandem, meaning you're getting all of them at the same time. You're not really going to save money by knocking out 1 or 2 of them. And I would say you're better off taking all 5. And the one thing that we really didn't talk a lot about, which is social engineering and having coverage for if somebody tricks you into wiring money to a fake account, you can get coverage for that, and you should purchase it.
I wouldn't recommend looking at, okay, we're going to eliminate specific forms of coverage. In terms of savings, I would rather have a client have all the forms of coverage, but perhaps take a higher deductible.
Yeah.
Okay. As a means to cutting costs. At that point, you still have all the forms of coverage in place, but by taking a greater percentage of the loss, you're going to help reduce your costs, and you still benefit by having all of the risk management and et cetera from the insurance company. By sitting there and saying, okay, I'm going to eliminate these three buckets, I also think you're going to find that the carriers are going to be less likely to be enthused about putting together a policy that only provides half the coverage.
Okay, that's really helpful. I don't think we have any more questions. Are there any thoughts that you would like to share now that we've had some questions that you think it is important to share with the group?
I really think that, the questions were great in terms of the fact that I think that the nonprofits out there are thinking in terms of managing risk. We all recognize, obviously, the statistics that I provided are legitimate, and that obviously some of the nonprofits are enduring these increases, et cetera. I would say the most important thing, as Josh outlined, have your plan in place, have all of the information, have your policy, have your key contacts, have your external, your internal contacts, have all of these things, as available as possible. Look to manage your risk throughout the year. Don't just put the book on the shelf and put it away and think that we're not going to focus on this throughout the year. Obtain the information from us as far as some of the providers that can help you throughout the year in terms of managing your risk, and test yourselves. Okay, have your IT consultant, have your IT people really legitimately test your people, find out, because as I said, in reviewing a number of reports to help create this, what I saw is that the majority of these losses are as a result of the human element. Okay, it's not as often just a flaw in the system. It's really the fact that somebody just didn't pay attention for that moment. Okay, and I'd say that's probably the most important thing today, is that everybody really has to be on their game at all times. It's really what it comes down to. Okay, work with your provider, work with your partners, try and get as much out of your insurance company as you can. We're welcome to meeting with, talking with any of you, and if we can assist, we're happy to help.
We do have two more questions. Sorry about that.
Yeah.
We do have a question in terms of the point that you brought up regarding human error. Is there a way to help avoid human error?
Coffee all day long, I guess. Again, really, it's education, and it's making sure that the employees understand it's really important to focus on this. Slow down a second, take your time, do what you got to do. Don't rush to do 17 things at the same time. It's we all look at it, and you're doing so many different things at the same time, and all of a sudden you'll catch yourself, and you're like, wow, you know what? There's a problem. If I hadn't stepped back, I could have fallen into a pitfall.
Yeah. Two things to that. First is, you'd be surprised working these claims all day. One of the big pitfalls is, let's say somebody clicks on a link that they know that they weren't supposed to, and for whatever reason, they're afraid to let somebody know, right? A key training element to this is mistakes happen. But if you don't let IT infrastructure and you don't let the C-suite folks know about it immediately, nobody can address it. So within that training, kind of that training framework, it's report early and report often. Don't worry about the fact that you made a mistake. Hundreds of thousands of people make the exact same mistake every single day. And I mentioned this before, and I'll mention it again because it's just so important. You're a not-for-profit. Training programs are expensive. You don't have to pay for it. You can talk to your insurance company about what kind of training programs do you offer, so I can have everybody from my receptionist all the way across to my CEO, right? The entire plane of the organization, everybody is just as prepared for these kinds of situations. Get those training programs in place. They're usually annual or biannual. They're beautiful programs and really do help.
Excellent, thank you. The next question is there a template that can be shared with us of the first thing you mentioned on the slide?
The breach plan or something else?
I'm not sure. It was an anonymous question from the audience. So
Okay.
I guess
think
if you went back to your presentation, whatever is the very first thing you mentioned.
Well, the first thing you mentioned is, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know if you're talking within the marketplace or Josh's portion on the event association.
I think it's the breach plan.
Yeah.
But I'm happy to provide that. And just, another interesting tip. I can give you a template, but your insurance company will help you build one. If you have cyber insurance,
Right.
they'll help you build one for free too. But I will get you a template, no problem. Not an issue.
Excellent. Hold on. We have another one now. Oh, yep.
All
No,
right.
you got it. That was it. Let me just
That's
make
it.
sure that we don't have any other questions here. Okay, so I think that we are good for now. Josh, did you have any closing comments that you wanted to share?
No, I think Michael hit it beautifully. I think we're good.
So I really want to thank both of you for truly a very powerful 52 minutes. That was great. And you gave us a lot to think about. If anybody here would like to talk with Michael or Joshua, please feel free to reach out to them. I'm sure that they'd be happy to set up some time. If you have any questions for us at the Nonprofit Resource Hub, or you'd like for us to make an introduction to Joshua or Michael, we are happy to do so also. Don't forget, we are doing that meet and greet on Monday. You might even be able to meet one of them there. Please do register in advance. And we're going to have this again prepared and viewable for everybody. That will be in a couple of days. So keep an eye out for your email. Our meet and greet is at Spirit of Huntington. You can find all the information on our website at Nonprofit Resource Hub. Once again, thank you both so much. We should probably do something like this quarterly because I have a feeling this is a very ever-changing landscape. So keep your calendars open for us.
Yeah, we'd be happy to do that. And as we're going through it, we definitely, feel there's some things that, we can add as, that evolves, and just one closing comment. As Allison said, we hit you with a lot, okay? Recognize that both Josh and I live, eat, and breathe this all the time. So, we're pretty experienced in it, and I'm sure it can be overwhelming. The important thing is to just step back, try and get as much as you can in place, and know that it's all a working document. Just continue to try and build and do the best you can. And as Josh put it, very importantly, the most important thing to tell employees, when you know what happens, speak up. Don't hide it. That's probably the biggest problem in these situations.
Yes.
But people try to hide that, oops, I made a mistake. Happy to help, and look forward to doing this again.
Thank you. And you have really wonderful comments. Everybody said thank you very much. It was very helpful. It's great information, and they appreciate all that you both shared. So thank you so much again to both of you. Again, you have any questions for them, just reach out. We are very, very happy to help you.
Thanks, Allison. Appreciate it.
Thanks,
Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great weekend.